All right, so thank you everybody for joining us. I'm Dr. Lieber, and many of you may know me because of my associations with Dedoose, but today I'm really happy to be wearing my Institute for Mixed Methods Research hat, hence my background today. This is another part of our operation and the one that I'm closest to because I'm a practicing social scientist. So I really enjoy talking about methods and bringing my research and my consulting experience to people who are using the Dedoose application or otherwise engaged in mixed methods research. So I'm going to jump right into our presentation today. So here's what I have planned for our time. Unfortunately, I don't know if any of you have kind of set yourself up for the series on descriptors. And Sarah Grummer was going to run another session earlier today. Unfortunately, she became another victim of COVID and needed to postpone that. So I hope if you're interested in a more general orientation to descriptors, you'll follow up and see when that session is going to run. I think that's going to happen soon. But today we're really going to focus on quantitative data, in mixed methods research. And here are the basic things that we're going to work through. Just going to give you a basic introduction to what we're doing with descriptors in general. A little bit about a research study that I'm going to use as an example. And then we're going to look into just examination of our quantitative descriptors. So Dedoose is not a quantitative data analysis tool, but it is designed to help you deal with quantitative data in very natural ways to a certain extent. There are certainly things you're going to want to go and do elsewhere, but we're trying to include within the platform an opportunity to engage in a lot of the activities that may cover most of what qualitative or mixed methods researchers need to do. So we'll look at the overall distributions within the Dedoose environment, what we can do with that. I'm going to present some ways of transforming quantitative data into qualitative descriptors so that you can use different analytic features. Some of the analytic features that are purely quantitative based in Dedoose, and then we'll talk about a couple of other things, the code weight system and dynamic descriptors, which are also designed to track more continuous types of information. Code weights being distributions that represent a dimension within coded content, and then dynamic descriptors are designed to let you track change over time. So I'll try to give you an introduction to all of those things today and see if there's any questions at the end. So first of all, the background on the QDAS adoption study, qualitative data analysis software. So a number of years ago, we ran a survey through the Institute querying people about their adoption of qualitative data analysis tools, things they like, things they don't, their comfort, their own experiences. And one of the things that we were interested in looking at was people's preparedness to adopt tools, particularly technology around qualitative data analysis. So this is since these tools began to pop up on the landscape, people from methodological standpoints, pedagogical standpoints have been concerned about whether these are appropriate tools, how to use them well, how to avoid any pitfalls. So that's what the study was about. And the Technology Readiness Index scale is a quantitative measure of how prepared people are to adopt new technologies. And so this measure has been used across lots of technologies. And the easiest example that I've come up with is how we have, as people who engage in banking, have adopted online banking tools. Okay, so there's a comfort level that we all have. And as these new tools become available, we're all, I'm more of an early adopter when it comes to certain kinds of technologies. And at the other end of the spectrum, my brother, I think he may have begun doing online banking, but he was a real laggard. So the Technology Readiness Index really attempts to distribute people along their preparedness, looking at different dimensions like how motivated they are, concerns that they have, comfort and things like that. So that's the quantitative measure I'm going to reference today. Then before we dive into the quantitative data themselves, I just wanted to talk about descriptors briefly in general. So in Dedoose, descriptors are there to help you explore the work that you're doing with your qualitative data through different dimensions, to slice things up into different pieces, to look at things over time. And so what these descriptor data allow you to do is create all kinds of visuals, be able to filter and then move through your data as you start to explore the research questions that you might have from the beginning. So it's really important to be intentional, or I would say a best practice, to be intentional about what your research plans are. What is the purpose of your study? What types of descriptor data will be most useful to you? So if you imagine that looking at things across different income levels or gender or places in the world, if those are important variables that we want to look at differences and patterns that we see in qualitative data based on these distinguishing characteristics, we would use descriptors to help us do that. Descriptors then can be anything that's relevant to your research questions, basic demographics, research site, time if we're doing longitudinal research, and often in mixed methods research, we're doing combined studies or nested studies where there's qualitative investigation taking place within or as part of a larger survey study. Just a quick ask if anybody's got their mics active, if you wouldn't mind muting so we're not getting any feedback. We'll appreciate that. Thank you. So descriptors in Dedoose are part of building what we call a web of connections. And I like to show this type of schematic because I think it helps people appreciate how data fit together in a Dedoose project, so that you can be thoughtful about how you're going to analyze your data. So descriptors are often organized and maybe collected through surveys. We can organize them in spreadsheets, and we might have a spreadsheet that looks like this, where we have our individual participants in a study. We have a variety of characteristics about them. This might be something we do prior to even collecting qualitative data to select our sample. As we proceed in a study like that, we're going to identify or collect our qualitative media. These are going to be our interview transcripts represented by documents here, maybe images, streams on video or audio. And then I've got an example down here as a larger document expanded. We'll work with that one in a second. But the relationships that are established between these different parts of the database are connected through these relationships here represented by these red arrows. So participant number one, for example, I've lost an arrow here to the JPEG, might have provided for us interview transcripts and then video. So we might have 2 pieces of media associated with that particular individual, and so on. We might also have layers or different levels of our analysis. So if we're doing a nested study where we have participants nested within schools where we're collecting these data, we may have a number of individuals who come from the same schools, but those media that were collected for them are associated both with the individual who provided those data and the school in which they attend. So we have now multiple sets of descriptors. So we can ask multi-level analysis, like as a function of the size of a school and participants' self-esteem level, what do we know about the things they said around particular topics? So that might be the type of question that we have. And here's how the descriptors might look inside of that setup. And then what do we do as qualitative mixed method social scientists? We develop our code system. All right, so let me go back. We have our code system, and then we do building a code system that has stabilized and you believe captures all of what you want to represent in a study is a tremendous amount of work. It's an iterative one where you're dealing with your data, but on a functional and a task type of basis, we're developing those systems. And then as researchers or research teams, we're going into our qualitative media, as in this example, document 4. We're identifying text that I've kind of labeled here as excerpt number 1, and then we're tagging that excerpt with any number of codes from our code system. So this is the web of connections that we're actually creating within the Dedoose environment, bringing in our data as media or descriptor data, building and having our code tree evolve within the system, and then applying that code, those codes to excerpts that we identify within our qualitative media. And it's through these relationships that all the analytics and filtering features in a Dedoose environment, or tools like in Vivo or Atlas, are going to operate and allow you to visualize and move through your data, hopefully in satisfying ways as you explore your research questions. All right. So the first thing that we will typically do, yeah, full disclosure, I was trained as a quantitative psychologist. So the numbers side of what we do as social scientists is, I would say, the most comfortable from a formal training perspective. I think I'm well trained now in other parts of what we do, but this was my formal background as a graduate student and so on. So with quantitative data, often the first thing that we're going to want to do is simply look at the data and see what it is that we have, right? So we may be using standardized measures where we have existing data sets that we can look at distributions. But if we're really going to focus on the questions that we have from our sample, we should look and see how are things looking for the population that we're studying here. What you're looking at here is a simple distribution across that technology readiness index scale. We have high, medium, and low. What you see with these rectangular bars is a segmentation feature in Dedoose. So it's simply, this is well, you'll see we can use this in different ways to create different number of segments, but it helps us chop up our distribution if that's something that we want to do. But looking at this distribution, we have a fairly normal curve, so we're not thinking there's anything remarkable here. We're going to go ahead and look down in our statistics down here in the bottom at our descriptors. So we have a sense about the quantitative characteristics of the variable, the technology readiness index, in preparing us to engage with it in other analysis. Okay. So a question then arises because there are many features in Dedoose that allow you to draw on categorical types of descriptors. And so we often encourage people who are using quantitative descriptor data to consider slicing the pie up based on what they've learned so that they have a little more control over the segments, okay? So I've taken that same curve here. Oh, this actually looks like a different distribution. And by sliding the slider at the bottom that is labeled segments, we can choose to create more or fewer number of segments across that distribution. So for example, if I simply want to look at high, medium, and low groups, because that will be sufficient for my analysis, then I may want to take a continuous distribution, chunk it up into those pieces, and use it in that form because it gives me control over where I decide what a high group is, what a middle group is, and what a lower group is, or 5 groups, for example, or more. So you have this type of freedom to look inside of the Dedoose environment. What I don't have a screenshot here for you, I have one for correlations, is if you click on any of these segments, what will happen in Dedoose is you will pull up all of the excerpts associated with the group of participants at that part of the distribution. So from this first example, we can look at what did the people who were at the higher end of technology readiness index scores say about the different topics that we identified and tagged within the qualitative data. So I can simply engage in that as essentially a filter into that group, pull up all the medium group, look at them, and start to get a sense of, are there important differences based on this distribution in the work that we're doing with the qualitative data. When you're going through that exercise, if you find that that is useful, then we would encourage you to consider transforming that descriptor field from a quantitative number type into categorical so that you've actually defined the groups, and then you're on your merry way using the more of the analytic features in Dedoose to carry out your mixed methods analysis. From a purely quantitative perspective, we can conduct basic t-tests in the Dedoose. So here we're looking at the technology readiness index score by gender. Again, we're just looking at that distribution for the 2 groups. We have our descriptive statistics down here at the bottom. We can see our t-value. Looks like it may not be significant. And linked to critical values table. So if you decide you want to see whether that is a significant statistical difference, you can do that right from the Dedoose environment here. We want to look at larger numbers of groups. We have 4. In this case, we have our, what did I look at? Our technology total group score. So we did intentionally then slice up this pie into 4 groups, and then we look to see how those groups fell out across the environment, across the distribution for these 4 groups that we identify or label as very low, lower, high, and high. And then we can get all of our relevant statistics here. Again, click through for the critical values table and for Tukey's honestly significant difference statistics if we want to look at pairwise comparisons. So these are some of the just purely quantitative analyses that we can run in Dedoose. When we're doing these purely quantitative analysis, t-tests and analysis of variance, we're not delving into the qualitative data unless we're using those segments, as I showed you earlier. One of my favorite features in the Dedoose analytics section is our correlation scatter plot. And so what this allows you to do is simply lay out 2 quantitative distributions across each other for a scatter plot. Here we have the technology total score, technology readiness index score, and the motivation subscale. So not surprisingly, we're going to see a positive relationship between people's scores on the total score and their motivation. The more motivated they are, the more highly likely they are to adopt technology and be more prepared to do that. And one of the nice things about this visual in Dedoose is that when we simply select a section of that scatter plot, as I've illustrated here with this box that's grayed in the background, it's going to pull up all of the excerpts there. So, and this is actually where I wanted to give you a peek into the Dedoose itself. So let me pull that up on the side here. So I want to just quickly jump in here to our analysis section. Our motivation subscale, our technology readiness total score. And so here's the live version of what I was just showing you on that previous slide. If I'm interested in this portion of my population who are both scored highly on the technology readiness index scale in person, and the motivation subscale, I can simply grab these cases and it will pull up all of those excerpts for me. So this is essentially a filter through based on the visual for a subset of data I'm interested in looking at, presumably for a particular purpose. So these are all of the excerpts associated with those cases that we've identified based on their scores for the technology readiness index total and the motivation subscale. We can create filters out of these in Dedoose. So that's what we'll be doing down here where it says make an active set or add to them. We can go ahead and open up each of those excerpts, begin to explore them. If we find there are excerpts that we're particularly interested in, we can actually then drill through even deeper into the underlying qualitative context. So I've just gone ahead and clicked through there and gone to that particular excerpt in the Dedoose. Where are we here? Here we are. In the context of the source document. So all of these features are built around the ways that we understand people want to naturally explore their data based on everything that they brought into the system, and then move through the results of particular subsets that they've identified through the different analysis and filtering. So this is how we would go about doing that. And then we can obviously filter out and filter down to excerpts that were tagged with particular tags and so forth. So these visuals then are really a quick way for you to see those global patterns. When you find things that are of particular interest to you, you can then drill through them throughout the context, right? Into the excerpts themselves, into the context from which those excerpts came, where we can then look around and perhaps start to think about the other things that people might be saying around those excerpts. And then I really want to highlight code weights in particular. This is a topic that you'll learn about elsewhere in Dedoose, but the code weight system, a little bit of backstory, I guess. When I first arrived at UCLA and began working with anthropologists and other social scientists who were much more practiced in traditional qualitative data analysis, one of the things that was going on in this lab was the idea of building distributions across coded content. And so what you're looking at here in this, this distribution here with the 5 segments is what's represented here is the level of difficulty code. And what the investigative team did was go into all the things that were tagged with things with content where people talked about how difficult it was to embrace qualitative data analysis software. Okay, so what's the learning curve basically was the question here. And so with the code weight system, what we're able to do is pull all of the things where people were talking about difficulty. Some people might have said things like, yeah, it was a little difficult. It was the same when I was first learning to use SPSS. But once I got my hands on it, I really got off and running. Okay, so they're talking about difficulty. We're going to tag that comment, but we're going to rate that as a relatively low difficulty comment in comparison to people who might be saying, I'm so uncomfortable with software that when I first put my hands on QDAS, it was just overwhelming, and it's taking me 5 years to begin to even use the tools effectively. So we would say that is somebody who is speaking about difficulty and saying it's extremely difficult for them. Okay, so when we have this qualitative content, and when it was first introduced to me, if we can imagine a pile sorting exercise where if we took everybody that was in the room today and said, hey, everybody, here's 20 excerpts where people were talking about difficulty in learning to use qualitative data analysis software. Put them into high, medium, and low groups. And everybody goes off and does that. And then we come back and say, okay, Raina, what did you get for high, medium, and low? Show me what you put in each group. Tell me what you were thinking about when you decided that this was low versus medium versus high. We do that together as a group, and we come to some agreement around the criteria that for all of us, we can agree distinguishes high, medium, and low based on the data that we were looking at, which is really important because these dimensions are built right off of the qualitative data. These are not created through scales. This is investigator-imposed interpretations. And one of the beauties of being able to develop these dimensions as an investigator is when people self-report, they don't have the benefit of understanding what everybody else in the survey said. They only can represent themselves. So if I ask people, rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 5 in terms of how difficult it was for you to adopt qualitative data analysis, people are going to give us responses. And from item response theory and all of the quantitative investigations, we know that people tend to report either what is socially desirable, so what they believe you want to hear, or everybody's above average if it's a desirable characteristic, and if it's undesirable, everybody's below average. Okay. Well, we know that can't be true from natural distributions. And so one of the things that we do when we're creating these dimensions as investigators is we're looking at all of the responses. So we're able to see what might distinguish one participant's response from another, develop these dimensions. And to the extent that you can do so, it really lets you do some interesting things analytically. And as a quantitative grounded person, when I learned about these numbers that could be used as proxies for representing qualitative content, I was really excited because I know what to do with numbers. So this was a really natural place to bring more quantitative and qualitative data methods together and actually allow the data to speak to each other by building in these mechanisms. And then we can use this distribution in the same way that we would with other types of descriptor data or self-report across the same dimensions. So I just want to point that out as a feature in Dedoose. It's something that if it's appropriate for your work, that that it might be something that you look at. And I see Kurt is on the job. Thank you. And he is pointing you in chat to article in our Learning Center about the use of code weights. So something I'm really fond of. But when we're talking about quantitative types of descriptors, I can't neglect that. I think it's a beautiful piece of a beautiful feature if it's useful in your work. The other thing that I've illustrated down here is the use of dynamic descriptors. In this example here, I only had a simple one given the projects that I had to work with, but we have a descriptor that we called phase, okay? And so what phase allows us to do is we had in this particular study an intervention. So we had pre-intervention information gathering, we had post-information info gathering, and then we had a follow-up. So we had 3 time points in the study. You might have other types of time distinctions in your research. And we can use dynamic descriptors to tag things that let us look across time. So all of the static types of information for your participants might be gender and age group and school and location and schools that they attended, all of that other type of information. That's information we don't expect to change over time. But when we interview them, we certainly hoped and expect to see different responses to similar questions pre and post intervention, and then at follow up to see if the impacts of the intervention were sustained over time. And so by using a dynamic descriptor, we're able to tag the interview from each participant as pre or post, also associated with all the static descriptor information for those participants so we can carry out all of the other analyses, but then look and see across time. And what we can see here, this was an emergent or early literacy research project where there was an intervention in Head Start schools. So just to explain what's going on here, we were looking at how reading activities in the home were being impacted by programs that were being put into place in Head Start schools. And we were hoping that there might be some carryover into improved reading practices. And what we saw here is very interesting change from pre to post in reading activities by mother. We go into talking about how we define those things, reading by other activities, and letter recognition. So we saw some positive trends over time here. And this would be a way for us to drill through visually to explore what's going on, what may have changed, to really help us understand if there was an impact, can we explain it? How and what changed? And in what ways and what nuance can we identify? All right, so I've shot through my slides pretty efficiently here. I'm going to stop again and see if there's any questions. I think this is the end. So I'm going to stop here. Kurt has shot you another link available to our Learning Center. And I want to open it up now and see if there's other directions I can go. I tend to move too fast through these things. So this is a great time to take me backwards for anything that we'd like to talk through further. All right. So in terms of filtering, where did my chat go? Apologies. So Nadia, any further guidance? Was the filtering through segments? Any other type of guidance you can offer for me here? Some of our most powerful drill down for segments. Perfect. Okay, thank you. All right, so we'll just start here. So we can look at the TRI total score here, and then just look at this distribution. And then again, reminding you that we can decide on our own how many segments we want to divide this distribution into. I like to work with fewer, so we have some cleaner analysis. And then simply looking to see, perhaps we want to do extreme group analysis. What if we just drop this into 3 groups here? We can go ahead and look at the very low end of the population. Let's go into a little more detail here about what happens when we pull up the data that sit behind these visuals. If we look up here in the top of this chart reviewer, we see we're looking at 145 total excerpts, matching 16 resources. And given that this was a survey, we can pretty much guess that we have 16 separate individuals represented in this group. So we have 16 people in this lowest of the three groups. And then we can go ahead and click right through to view the excerpts themselves. And when we're looking at these views, I want to point out we can also start to add other types of coding. Okay, so this is an active now, we call our excerpt editor or an excerpt editing mode. So if we decide that the level of difficulty code here this also has to do with, takes more time to code. So we're going to say data preparation might be a code we want to tag there. I can simply double click that code to apply it to the excerpt. So we're not just simply filtering through to view excerpts, we can actually work with them. We can go back to them in context and actually modify them as well if we wanted to do that, right? So we can go into that particular response here. Oh, this is the one we were in. Oh, no, it wasn't. Here's our level of difficulty. And if I want to go in and actually edit that code, I can do that here, or I can delete it entirely, which I can do because this is my demo project. Okay, so I can just eliminate that. So this is be the document view where we're doing sort of that raw grounded coding. Okay, this is typical. And just as an aside, I'll get right to your question, Claudia. It's a great question. Just as an aside, what you're seeing here is a document that was generated based on a survey import. And so what you see is because each of these, we have very nice, clean little excerpts created here around every piece of qualitative content. And what the survey importer does is it identifies which of the columns contain open-ended data in your study and which identifies as closed-ended. And for the closed-ended data, it recognizes them as descriptors, creates a descriptor set for each of the studies. And then for all of the qualitative content from a particular individual, it will pull that content, tag it with whatever the column header was. So when you do a survey import, it's often the question that prompted it. So this is an indexing of all the qualitative content, compiles it into a single document for the individual, and then presents it to you this way with all the excerpts already tagged, so that we can then go in post-survey, carry out tremendous degree of analysis as it stands, but then also begin to work with it, add more nuance, clean it up, anything that we want to do subsequently. Claudia asked about filtering excerpts by code. That's going to take us into Code has, sorry, I'm just noticing in chat, Kurt has responded that filtering is a big subject. So I'm going to give you a quick glimpse at where we would go to carry this out. And then you should follow the link that Kurt provided to the Learning Center to learn more. But for more complex, very narrow types of filtering, let me step back. What I mentioned earlier is when we're looking at these segments for your technology readiness index total score, I can go ahead and pull up one of these segments. These 545 excerpts. When I make these an active set, this is actually creating a filter based on those excerpts. What Claudia is referring to is going in a little deeper, right? So these are going to be all the excerpts. She's suggesting that we might want to only look at some that are tagged with particular codes. Okay, so I've gone ahead and I've made that an active set. I don't know if you caught that. I clicked on that. I'm going to close this pop-up and I'm going to go into data sets. But you see the icon in the main menu bar shaded red. So that's a queue. We've already activated a filter, right? So we can go into that space. Now I can go into the codes tab here and select only those codes I might be interested in looking at. Okay, so I'm going to turn them all off and say I'm only interested in looking at level of difficulty right now and maybe how important data sharing is. Okay, So I like to go back and check the data set to make sure I see that that filter is active. So we look here and we can see that we have 20 of 40 codes active. Go ahead and close that. I can go to my excerpts workspace. And while this filter is active, we're only looking at those excerpts that were in that particular segment for the Technology Readiness Index score and have been tagged by either the difficulty score, and I forgot what the other code was. So I'm going to go ahead and show that as a column. Let's uncheck all. So you can see here, I've just changed the view here, what's in view in that panel. Oh, that's okay. So we can see here, here's the media file. And we can see that for all of the excerpts in this particular set, they've all been tagged with level of difficulty. And then as I want to take the next step and start to explore them, I can just pop it open and scroll right through that list. Okay. So this is going to get you to really narrow in. And the data set workspace really is, can be complicated, but when, hopefully we've set it up so that you can then intentionally filter down to any subset of excerpts tagged with particular codes from different subsets of the population and so on. All aspects of the database are in play in the filtering section, including the people who actually created the excerpts in your study. So if you're doing a collaborative work where you have multiple people working on a study and creating excerpts, we might want to examine all the things that Mary did because she's our top performer. Thank you, Mary, for volunteering to be my example today. And we want to just look and see, what did Mary's work look like, and then compare it to Eli's work because he's new to the team. And I saw there was another Eli in the audience today. I'm not referring to you. I'm going to refer to myself because this Eli might be new to the team. And so looking at the way that I created and tagged excerpts compared to Mary is a great way to start to look at whether I'm kind of meeting the standards so that I can be cut loose to independently contribute to the database construction itself. Thanks, Kurt. I hope you're welcome, Claudia. And Coach Kurt is adding in some nice tips here. He's the lead man in our support team. And so both particularly from a technical aspect, he's a guy that can definitely answer questions for you as well as the other members of the team. So, all right. And then in the data set workspace, we can also clear the current set so that if you have activated a filter through any number of mechanisms through your visuals or manually in the data set workspace, I can turn it off here. And then I know that all of the data in the database are active at that particular time. All right. So we have about 15 minutes left, and I want to leave it to any other questions for you. And for those of you where this is a relatively new area of Dedoose, I know that's a little bit like drinking from the fire hose. But there's a lot going on, and I really do want to emphasize and encourage the value of the Learning Center and encourage people to look at it. It's where Kurt is shooting you for certain resources, and it is the place now where we are providing the most up-to-date and video-guided types of information to really help you get on your way. So there's a lot going on here, and sometimes, hopefully what I'll provide for you today is a good orientation to what's possible. You're using your imaginations already about the types of data that you're dealing with. And if you're connecting some of what you're wanting to accomplish or imagining new things that you want to accomplish, hopefully the review of this meeting and then resources in the Learning Center will really help you get your arms around how you can pull that kind of stuff off in Dedoose. If there's anything else I can give you, I'll stick around for a few more minutes. Please feel free to, we're gonna leave this as a few minutes as an open forum. But I do want to thank everybody for joining. I hope we've given you something useful here, and I've piqued your curiosity methodologically. There's other places you can go to learn about what we've done in terms of building Dedoose features around a methodological and epistemological orientation, and how we tie those things together. So I'm really hoping that some of this resonates with your own background and ideas about where you want to take your analysis. Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks, Kurt, for the assist. And I will sign us off. Have a great week. I hope Fourth gave us a little rest and we're all ready to get back at it.